Okay, so in this little quick time screencast, I'm going to be talking about my digipak in relation to question 1. So starting off, I'm just going to almost summarize some of the typical conventions which you would see in a digipak, and then I'm going to break down the different areas and go into a little bit more detail about more of the details. Okay, so some of the typical conventions for the front cover, which is this piece here for me. So normally you would have the band image, the artist name, the artist title, and it would all need to it needs to include all to make sure that it actually looks like the right product, rather than a random stray thing. Going on to the back, which is this piece here, you need the track list, the special features, and an image. Again, if you want to adhere to the typical conventions, that's the, again, minimum which you do need to require to actually make sure that it looks like the right product. Okay, so then for the spine, which is here and here, this is normally either the artist name, the album name, the record name, or the reference number. This is just so then, like, if it is in the whole shop with like all of the different albums, they'll be able to categorize them easier and like find out if they have any stock and everything like that. So when it goes for the inserts and the intersections, I've called this the insert and these the intersections. Just because you have to open up all the flaps to get to them. Anyway, I got distracted then. So you'll normally have like images, maybe a thank you message, merch, website. Normally like the images follow a sort of pattern, or they have something in common to show the audience that they are related. Sometimes they might include phrases from other songs, so phrases, so then it gets the audience involved as well. Just little hints which help to connect the audience to the band's products. Okay, so moving on to the layout. So for the front cover, I decided that I was going to include an extremely close. I decided that I was going to use an extremely close-up picture, which kind of can foreshadow my music video if you see it before. Is already trying to make the audience feel rather uncomfortable with this whole situation, and as though they're not in control of what happens. I feel as though this has done it pretty well, to be honest, as it definitely makes me feel uneasy. So in order to create this image, actually, it was quite a simple, half simple progress. So I had to start off by using the Photoshop equivalent of Echo, which is just a layer and an opacity layer, to the image to increase the intensity while making the eyes and glasses look larger and deeper, as a result making them more like entrancing, depending on your opinion. So I also made sure that my colouring for this image was a little bit more down and dirty to still have the feel, or while still having the feel of being realistic. This was kind of important for me to make sure that it wasn't too far off the real thing. Yeah, that was a key thing for me, to be honest. And I think I did it pretty well. On the inside, on the inside, I'm calling it this panel here, just because it's the first flap which you see when you open. it's so I wanted the opposing images to act like a mirror, highlighting the artist and the actors involved, focusing on the lower half of the faces to create some sort of a mystery while creating a close relation. So I'm on about the close relationship with the audience themselves here, as I feel as though there is something quite intriguing with this. The fact that they're almost becoming without an identity because they've taken away their eyes. I think that's a really interesting idea. On the CD, I did want there to be fire, but I cut it to have the right circle shape. I just made this a really subtle circle, which, for example, you can see it here on this edge quite nicely. I feel as though it just keeps it quite clean and tidy. Yeah. So for the two-side images, I wanted them to be really desaturated to create more attention on the fire as well, to make sure that the audience's attention is right in the centre of the page, which I think has worked pretty well. Moving on to this first image here. I feel as though this is an image which could stand out on its own or while still relating to the rest of the CD, if that makes sense. So I've been able to create a contrast of using like a mid close-up shot, allowing the audience to see the full face of the artist on this one. I've been able to create a contrast in the colours, the colour scheme throughout, which is a really strong idea. So I'm on about how I've got the same black and white levels for all of these three photos. It just feels as though it's more connected, which was really important to show the audience that this is a whole media product rather than just random images selected and put in. Yeah, so then moving on to the back cover. So I've created quite a contrast in the colours, especially in the background. What you can see when it's on the computer rather than printed out is that I have a very faint image of the lips. I really like this idea of having it quite subtle. It's a shame that it didn't show up on the print. I guess it's because I've got a lot going on the page itself and it wasn't able to identify the different tones well enough. And by the tones I'm on about these ones here compared to up here, for example. I feel as though it's quite a bold background even without the lips in it, with the colour, and I think that it works as a good contrast against the writing, including all the institution info and everything. Although it's quite a simple layout overall with no specific areas without anything, it still adheres to 5 seconds of sun. So I think that it's really clever the way in which it has, I think that it's really clever the way in which it has a powerful overall message. When it came to the overall design for the front cover, I wanted to make sure that the vibe given off was what I want. So that's kind of creepy, imposing, and the whole direct eye contact with the audience to stand out from all of the others on the shelf. I think that I have got this pretty well, and I'm really happy. And I know that I said this about the layout, but I think that it has worked, especially how I've managed to get the eyes pretty central. It did take me a while, and I did have to puppet warp it a little bit, just because it wasn't quite even, but I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out now. I had to think about how the text as well would support my design but wouldn't impact on the direct eye contact on here and here. So as they're two different fonts as well, this caused a few more challenges than I would have liked, if I'm completely honest. One of my main issues with this actually was the idea that the audience might not take these the right way, and none of them are the same letter or the same size. And I do normally like to make sure that everything is the same size and consistency and everything like that. So this was a little bit of a challenge for myself in a way, just to see if I actually could do that. So on the inside for these 3 images here, so I have the 2 images facing out but slightly turned in, which creates more of a central feel to the overall layout, but also the fire again, and how they both have a little quote at the same angle on their faces so that the flow of the pages line up as well. It also promotes the rest of their songs on their albums, not just the one which I've been focusing on overall. So I've created a slightly lighter area, as I did mention before, around the fire, just to show the significance of my characters and the roles they play. Because of Lucan being my artist, I wanted him larger originally. Oh, we are on about this one now, sorry. I did want him to be a little bit larger than my secondary character. This isn't because of a sexism reason, this is purely because he's the one who's meant to be singing it, and it's from his perspective for the majority of the video, so I felt as though it was appropriate to make sure that he was slightly bigger. I did play around with the opacity for Saskia, but then I thought that it would be best just to make sure that she's still visible, and I didn't want to put her at a disadvantage for anything. I really wanted to make sure on this image as well that I included the dark room scene, just to create a bit of a contrast with the rest of the images, otherwise it would have looked rather monotone, which wouldn't have been brilliant if I'm honest. I decided to put the darkroom photos in the same direction of the face so that the audience didn't get distracted, and they could still see my characters' faces, which was pretty important to me. On the faces, I put a gradient fade so that the main part of the face can still be seen on it. So it almost looks like this bit has been purposely, intentionally rubbed out. That was my intention completely, as I did want to make sure that you can still see his face and her face as well. Yeah, so that was really important to me. So when it came to the back, 5 Seconds of Summer is known to have their track list to take over the whole back page, apart from the institution info bit, that's just the normal. I played with this idea for quite a while actually, but it took me a while to make sure that it didn't look too similar to all of their other albums, but then still linking to my album, if that makes sense. Like some of the comments which I got from before I changed it to this idea was that it was quite childish, a bit playful. It didn't match my vibe at all, basically. Then I came up with the idea of almost like a ransom note, and if I should have all of the same notes, well, individual songs on the same letters, on the same piece of paper, or if I should have them both, like all of the individual letters cut out. I think that I preferred the individual letters come out. I feel as though it still allows you to see like the depth of the image behind it, which is completely important to this whole situation. Yeah. So yeah, I did try out both of the looks, and I feel as though although this one is definitely my own spin, it's not too far off from their overall style, so it doesn't look too out of point. For the institution info bit at the bottom, I did want it to stand out from the page while matching the rest of the text, so I felt as though just putting it in white would be a fair balance of this, as I made sure that as well it's not taking over too much of the page and that it's just neatly at the bottom, which is quite satisfying. I decided as well that the background should match the idea with the first, or the ransom note idea. So I've made sure that it was like a textured background of paper, which I'm quite happy with. It's like a subtle detail, but it's a detail which I noticed because I did it. I needed to test as well to make sure that the little letters wouldn't come out too big or too small on different names depending on their length and everything. So moving on to the spine. So this was a little bit all over the place for me. So I did toy with putting the album name on there, and having the 5 Seconds of Summer abbreviation with the album name. I felt as though it was becoming a little bit overcrowded and it didn't really fit with the almost minimalistic style apart from the back I'm going for. So I did decided to go against that and just write 5 Seconds of Summer. So I also thought about using this whole ransom note idea with the little letters, and it turns out that because on all of the letters they've got this excess of white to show that I've almost cut them out, it ended up looking tiny letters, so you couldn't really see anything. Although the letters were bold, they just looked more like little smudges, and it wasn't brilliant. It didn't stand out enough. I also felt as though it was a little bit of an overkill because it was like cut out, and it was just a lot. So I feel as though by having it in a bold font, it's almost just like breaking up and changing the general thing which is going on. So moving on to the text and font for my product. If we're just thinking about the product or the font right now, for the album name, I toyed with having them in the same distance apart I'm on about here right now because they are slightly different widths apart, but obviously that's because like they're at an angle and they're not exactly the straightest cut out things. That was my intention. Yeah, I did think about making sure that they were all perfect, but it sort of ruined the aesthetic vibe given off by the letters on their own, which isn't really great. Yeah, I didn't really feel as though I needed to overcomplicate the font with more words than I needed. Yeah, because I could have put the whole abbreviation for the song and the album name, but I felt as though having it calm, just those 4 letters, I really feel as though that impacts on the audience, especially due to the positioning of the letters on the glasses. It really hits the audience and makes them think, oh, okay, so is he looking through the calm through you, or is he looking over the calm at you? It just makes you think a little bit more about the specific composition and how he's looking at it as well. So for the artist name down here, this was a little bit weird if I'm honest. So I did play around with this again quite a lot. I thought about if I wanted it more subtle, if I wanted it bolder, but overall I thought that the subtler look with a shadow effect to add the tone and vibe, just like what I did for the image idea, worked quite well. I decided to write the whole name so it would match with the rest of the album cover rather than just write 5 SOS. As when I wrote this, it was really hard to tell the difference between the 5 and the S, which isn't really great if I'm honest. Yeah, they just look too similar. Moving on to the inside. So these three again. The only text which I included was the few quotes, the two quotes, and that was in the same font style as on the front, but just with a cursive. I was really trying to keep this whole this connectivity like between the pages to make sure that they actually look, but then not too far away. So by doing this, I feel as though it adds a little bit of variety to all of the similarities. So the reasons why I chose these lines out of all of the verses and songs was because I felt as though they connected to the opinions and views of the actors in the music videos. I know that was a lot. So the right quote on Lucan, this one here, I felt as though that showed more his opinion on the stalking situation. Like it's a common perception amongst stalkers that they're obsessed about this one person. They can't get them out of their head. They don't see that they're doing anything wrong. Whereas on the left-hand side, it's more about the state of mind of the person that has been stalked and how the stalked has been left in a way, and what impact that has to them after it all finishes. So I think that's kind of interesting, the way which they connected to the video meaning as well, or how I interpreted it. Yeah. So when it came to the back cover, there was a lot of debate if I should have some of these smaller, some of these larger, just to see how much room I could take up. So I went for a variety just to make sure that it didn't get too boring. So like, for example, here, thin white lines. So I tried to make sure that it was a little bit thinner, for example. Just so then it would add a little bit more of a variety. I also tried to make sure that it didn't just go blank filled, blank filled, blank filled, blank filled, because again, it would seem as though it had too much of a pattern, and I wanted it to be a little bit more random, but with still having order to it, if that makes sense. Yeah, as I started to say before, as I cut out all the letters individually, it did make it more interesting by changing the background or like adding the border or something. So yeah, I'm really happy with the way that they turned out. So I did try and make sure that the institution info down here was the same, sorry, was the same font as on the spine. I obviously I did succeed, but it did take me a lot of time to find out to make sure that I included all of the right info, which was normally included. Yeah, so I did find that actually quite interesting to read into all of them, what you're normally meant to include in all of that. Then finally, on the spine, I used the same font as on the front, just in the all capitals and with the italics on. This is again just to make sure that it has a little bit of variety but similarity. Yeah, I really like this idea just because it's bold, it's obvious, and for any of the fans, it's going to stand out a mile, even if it's not the front cover standing out. Okay, so that sums up my digipak section of question 1, how do your products use or challenge conventions, and how do they represent social groups or issues?